A man's character is not defined by the power he holds, but by how he treats those he believes have none. For Captain Richard Thorne, a veteran pilot with an ego as high as his flight path, a single passenger stood between him and an on-time departure. He saw a man who didn't fit someone who didn't belong in the exclusive world of private air travel. With the full force of his authority, he had the man removed. What he didn't know was that the quiet, unassuming passenger he just humiliated wasn't just on the manifest. He had just bought it. The story you're about to hear isn't just about karma. It's about the catastrophic collision between prejudice and power, and how one man's quiet observation brought an entire empire to its knees. The air in the 54th floor conference room was worth more than the real estate it occupied. It was a rarefied atmosphere, filtered and cooled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, smelling faintly of glass cleaner, expensive leather, and the silent, terrifying hum of money moving. Outside the panoramic window, the Los Angeles sprawl glittered under a hazy afternoon sun, a concrete jungle of dreams and deadlines. Inside, however, the world had shrunk to the polished mahogany surface of a 10-meter-long table. At one end sat Gregory Finch, the silver-haired patrician CEO of Stratus Air Charter. His posture was impeccable, a lifetime of Brooks Brothers suits and boardroom battles etched into the straight line of his back. For 30 years, he had built Stratos Air from a two-plane puddle jumper into a respectable mid-tier private airline, a preferred carrier for corporate executives, mid-level celebrities, and anyone who valued time over money but couldn't quite afford a NetJets membership. Now he was selling it. His smile was tight, a carefully constructed mask of cordiality that did little to hide the melancholy in his eyes. Across from him, the new owner was a presence of profound stillness. Elias Vance was 42 years old, though he could have passed for 32. He wore a simple dark grey Henley shirt and charcoal-coloured trousers that were impeccably tailored but devoid of any branding. His watch was a discreet IWC Portuguesa, a nod to classic engineering rather than flashy wealth. He wasn't what Finch or anyone in his world expected a billionaire to look like. There was no swagger, no entourage of sycophants. There was only a quiet, unnerving focus in his dark eyes, the kind of focus that could dissect a balance sheet or a man's character with equal dispassionate precision. Beside Elias sat Annika Sharma, the head of mergers and acquisitions for Vance Capital Group. She was the opposite of her boss's quietude, a shark in a Savile Row suit. Her movements sharp, her gaze missing nothing. She slid the final signature page across the table. "Gregory," she said, her voice smooth, but with an edge of tempered steel. "If you'll sign here and here, that should be the last of it." Finch picked up the heavy gold-plated pen, a gift from a long-forgotten client. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the pen's nib hovering over the paper. This was it. The end of his legacy handed over for a number with 9 zeros attached to it. It was a phenomenal, life-changing amount of money, but it felt like a funeral. Elias watched him not with impatience, but with a deep, analytical calm. He understood the weight of this moment. Vance Capital didn't just buy companies. It absorbed them, transformed them, and reshaped them in Elias's image of ruthless efficiency and unimpeachable ethics. He had started with nothing. A foster kid from the south side of Chicago, who'd taught himself to code, built a revolutionary logistics software company in his 20s, sold it for a fortune, and then started Vance Capital with the proceeds. His every move was calculated, his every investment scrutinized not just for profit potential, but for cultural integrity. He bought companies that were good but could be great, and he often found the rot not in the financials but in the people. Finch signed. The ink flowed dark and final. He pushed the folder back. "It's done," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Stratos Air is yours, Mr. Vance." Elias offered a small, respectful nod. "Thank you, Gregory. You've built a solid foundation. We intend to honor that." Anika was already gathering the documents, her efficiency a stark contrast to Finch's lingering sentimentality. As we discussed, she stated, "Looking at Finch, the transition will be managed under a strict non-disclosure agreement for the next 72 hours. No public announcements, no internal memos. For all intents and purposes, you are still the CEO until Monday morning." Finch nodded numbly. "I understand." The element of surprise. "The element of assessment," Elias corrected him gently. "I need to see the engine of this company as it truly runs, not as it performs for a new owner. I want to understand the culture from the ground up." He stood, and the room's atmosphere shifted with him. "Which is why I'll be taking Flight 712 to New York this evening." Finch looked surprised. "Flight 712. That's one of our standard shuttles. From the private terminal at LX. It's efficient, but not our premium service. I could arrange a Gulfstream for you, of course. My treat." Elias smiled, a rare, genuine expression that briefly lit up his face. "I appreciate that, Gregory. But I'm not interested in being treated like the owner. I'm interested in being treated like a customer. An ordinary customer. It's the best way to take a company's temperature." Anika had already made the booking under a pseudonym tied to a corporate account, a standard procedure for their acquisitions. It was a simple passenger ticket, indistinguishable from any other. Elias Vance would, for the next few hours, cease to exist. In his place would be a Mr. E. Carter, a consultant for a mid-level tech firm. 4 hours later, the private terminal at LAX was an oasis of calm compared to the public terminal's chaotic sprawl. Here the carpets were plush, the lighting was soft, and the clientele spoke in hushed, important tones. Even in this environment of understated luxury, Captain Richard Thorne stood out. He was 58, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched, and a steely grey crew cut that defied the California sun. He wore his pilot's uniform, like a suit of armor, the 4 stripes on his epaulets gleaming. Thorne was a pilot of the old school. He believed in hierarchy and standards in a certain look. He had flown for major commercial airlines for 2 decades before what he termed a disagreement over professional standards, and what HR termed a series of complaints from junior female flight crew saw him transition to the private sector. At Stratos Air, his seniority gave him an almost mythical status among the other pilots. He was technically excellent, his landings as smooth as silk, but his personality was a grinding stone. He stood near the check-in desk, sipping an espresso and surveying the waiting area like a hawk. He knew most of the regulars, the tech bros in their fleece vests, the Hollywood agent talking loudly into his phone, the family from Orange County who flew to their Hamptons summer home. These were his people, the people who appreciated the invisible wall that separated this world from the one outside. Then he saw him. Elias Vance. Now. Mr. E. Carter sat in a chair away from the main group, reading a paperback novel. He had a simple black backpack at his feet. His Henleyan trousers, which looked understated and expensive in a boardroom, looked merely simple here. To Thorne's eyes, conditioned by years of judging people by their material signifiers, Elias didn't just look out of place. He looked like a mistake, a security breach. Thorne's lip curled in a barely perceptible sneer. He took a final sip of his espresso and walked over to the young woman at the gate desk. "Morning, sir. Rah," he said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Manifest look clean for 7 and 12. Kara, a cheerful woman in her late 20s, smiled up at him. "Morning, Captain. Yes, all checked in and accounted for. We're fully booked today." Thorne leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. He nodded his head subtly in Elias's direction. "Who's that?" Sarah glanced over. "Oh, that's Mr. Carter. First time flying with us, I think." E. Carter. Carter Thorne repeated, tasting the name and finding it wanting. "And what's his story? I don't have one, Captain." The ticket was booked through the Amalgamated Tech corporate account. "Everything's verified." Thorne straightened up, his eyes narrowing. Amalgamated Tech. He'd never heard of it. It sounded fake. Probably some startup. He watched as Elias turned a page in his book, completely engrossed. The man's calmness irritated Thorne. It felt like an affront. People in this terminal were supposed to be buzzing with self-importance, not sitting quietly like they were waiting for a bus. "Just seems off," Thorne muttered more to himself than to Sarah. "Keep an eye on him. I don't like surprises on my aircraft." He walked away, leaving Sarah feeling slightly uneasy. She'd worked for Stratos Air for 3 years, and Captain Thorne's intensity never got easier to handle. She looked again at Elias. He seemed perfectly pleasant. He'd smiled when he checked in, said thank you, and then sat down to read. He was the least problematic passenger she'd dealt with all day. She didn't know that Captain Thorne's finely tuned prejudice had just locked onto its target, and on his aircraft, the captain's word was law. The call to board was made with the typical efficiency of the terminal. Passengers folded laptops, ended calls, and began to file towards the gate, a smooth river of privilege flowing towards the waiting aircraft. Elias closed his book, slipped it into his backpack, and joined the end of the line, observing everything. He noted the practiced, almost weary professionalism of the ground staff, the way the flight attendants greeted the familiar faces with practiced warmth. This was the data he had come for, the unscripted everyday reality of his new company. As he reached the door of the Embraer 175, he was greeted by a young flight attendant. Her name tag read, Chloe. She had bright, intelligent eyes and a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, her voice carrying a note of sincere welcome that stood out. "Thank you," Elias replied, smiling back. He found his seat, 12A, a window seat in the last row of the business class cabin. It was comfortable enough, the leather clean, the legroom adequate. He stowed his backpack under the seat in front of him and settled in, looking out at the flurry of activity on the tarmac. He felt a sense of satisfaction. The operation was smooth. The product was solid. That satisfaction was short-lived. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Captain Richard Thorne standing in the aisle, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stern authority. He wasn't looking at all the passengers. He was looking directly and only at Elias. Sir Thorne began, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "I'm Captain Thorne. I'm going to need to see your identification and your boarding pass again." Elias blinked slightly, taken aback by the direct confrontation. Every other passenger had boarded without a second glance. "Of course, Captain." He reached into his pocket and produced the boarding pass and the driver's license he was using for his cover identity. Thorne took them, his fingers barely brushing Elias's. He studied the ID, then the boarding pass, holding them up to the cabin light as if expecting the ink to dissolve. He made a show of scrutinizing Elias's face, comparing it to the photo. The entire act was a performance of suspicion. Elias Carter Thorne said mispronouncing the first name deliberately as Eli-us. "It's Elias," Elias corrected him gently. Thorne ignored him. "Says here, you're with Amalgamated Tech." "That's right," Elias said, keeping his voice even. He knew what was happening. This wasn't a security check. This was a challenge, a gatekeeping exercise. He had seen it before in different forms throughout his life. It was a test, and how he responded mattered. But he hadn't expected the test to be administered by the pilot himself. "Funny," Thorne said with a humorless smirk. "I've been flying this route for 7 years. I know every major player in the tech space from the Valley to Silicon Alley. Never heard of them." "We tend to keep a low profile," Elias replied, the words tasting ironic in his mouth. Chloe, the flight attendant, had noticed the interaction and moved closer, her expression one of concern. "Is there a problem, Captain?" she asked, her tone respectful but protective of the passenger. Thorne waved a dismissive hand at her, not even gracing her with a look. "I'm handling it. We have a potential discrepancy with the passenger manifest. Standard procedure." He turned his full attention back to Elias. "The thing is, Mr. Carter, we have certain standards on Stratos Air. Our clients pay a premium for security and comfort. Your booking was made last minute on a corporate account I've never seen before. It raises red flags." This was a lie, and Elias knew it. Annika had booked the flight 2 days ago. The red flags weren't in the system. They were in the captain's mind. "I assure you, Captain." "Everything is in order," Elias said, his voice dropping a register, losing its casual tone and gaining a quiet firmness. "My ticket is paid for, my identity is verified. I'm just looking to get to New York, same as everyone else." The other passengers were starting to notice. Heads were turning. The low hum of conversation in the cabin faltered. The air grew thick with tension. Thorne leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a venomous, conspiratorial tone. "Let me be frank. You don't fit the profile of our clientele. I have the ultimate authority on this aircraft, and my gut tells me something is wrong. My gut has kept me and my passengers safe for 30 years. There it is, Elias thought. The quiet part said out loud. It wasn't about a ticket or a company. It was about a profile. Chloe stepped forward again, more assertively this time. Captain Thorne, with all due respect, Mr. Carter's documents were cleared by the gate agent and TSA. I checked the manifest myself. Everything matches. There's no official basis for this. She was taking a risk, challenging her superior in front of a cabin full of passengers, but her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. Thorne finally turned to her, his eyes flashing with fury. Are you questioning my command, Ms. Davies? Your job is to serve drinks and ensure the cabin is secure for takeoff. My job is to ensure the safety of this flight, and that includes who is on it. Go back to the galley. Now. Chloe's face paled, but she held her ground for a second longer, her gaze flicking between the steely-faced captain and the impossibly calm passenger. She saw no threat in Elias, only in the man persecuting him. Finally, with a look of helpless apology towards Elias, she retreated. Thorne felt a surge of triumph. He had re-established his dominance. Now to finish it. He straightened up, his voice rising to a formal declarative volume for all to hear. Mr. Carter, due to security concerns and my authority as pilot in command. I am not comfortable having you on my flight. I'm officially denying you passage. You will have to disembark the aircraft." A collective quiet gasp went through the cabin. This was unprecedented. Elias didn't move. He simply looked at Thorne, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry. He was assessing. He was running calculations, processing data. The data was Thorne's prejudice, Chloe's courage, the other passengers' discomfort and silence. It was a complete, real-time cultural audit. "So let me be perfectly clear," Elias said, his voice calm and precise, cutting through the thick silence. "You are removing me from this aircraft, a flight for which I have a valid ticket, based on nothing more than your gut feeling. I'm removing you for the safety and security of my flight." Thorne snapped, his face reddening. He was losing control of the narrative. "That is my right. It is my duty." He looked towards the open cabin door and raised his voice. "Ground staff! I need a passenger escort now." 2 ground crew members appeared at the door, their faces etched with confusion. They saw a well-dressed, imposing pilot and a calm man sitting in a window seat. Elias held Thorne's gaze for one final moment. He had all the data he needed. Slowly, deliberately, he gathered his backpack, stood up, and moved into the aisle. He gave the other passengers a sweeping, unreadable glance. He saw shock, a little fear, and in some, a flicker of shame. He didn't say another word. As he walked past Thorne, their shoulders nearly brushed. The captain stood ramrod straight, a sentinel guarding a gate of his own making. As Elias stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge, a small, cold smile touched his lips. Captain Thorne thought he had just won a battle for the soul of his airline. He had no idea he had just surrendered the entire kingdom. Elias Vance walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the terminal growing louder, a stark contrast to the charged silence of the cabin he'd just left. He didn't look back. There was no anger in his stride, only purpose. The moment his feet hit the plush carpeting of the gate area, he pulled his personal phone from his pocket. Not the burner he used as Mr. Carter, but the encrypted device that connected him to his empire. He found a quiet corner away from the curious stares of the ground staff and dialed Anika Sharma. She answered on the first ring. "Anika," he said, his voice perfectly level. "Elias, you shouldn't be calling me. Is everything all right? You're supposed to be in the air." Her voice was sharp with concern. "There's been a change of plans," Elias said. "We have a problem. A code red culture issue on Flight 712. The pilot in command. A captain, Richard Thorne, has just removed me from the aircraft." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Anika, rarely surprised, was speechless. "He did what? On what grounds?" "The grounds of, and I quote me, not fitting the profile," Elias replied dryly. He was quite explicit. It was a textbook case of discriminatory profiling performed with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But that's not the point. The point is the systemic failure it represents. Execute the protocol, Anika, all of it, effective immediately. The protocol was a contingency plan Vance Capital had for every acquisition. It was a series of steps designed for a worst-case scenario, a corporate blitzkrieg to seize absolute control in the face of an existential threat to the brand. All of it. Anika confirmed, the shock in her voice replaced by icy efficiency. The press release, the SEC filing the board notification, "Grounding the fleet, ground the fleet first," Elias commanded. I want every Stratos airplane on the ground or returning to its nearest hub within the hour. No exceptions. Then release the news. I want Captain Thorne to hear about his new boss while he's still sitting in the cockpit, wondering why he's not getting clearance for takeoff, and arrange an emergency video conference. I want the entire senior management team, including Gregory Finch, online in 60 minutes. Consider it done, Annika said. I'll have a car for you at arrivals in 10 minutes. We have work to do. Elias disconnected. He looked through the large terminal window at the plane he was supposed to be on. He could see the silhouette of Thorne in the cockpit, a proud, unmoving figure. A man who had just made the biggest mistake of his life and was still blissfully unaware. Aboard Flight 712, Captain Thorne felt a deep primal satisfaction. He had purged the unclean. He had asserted his authority. He had protected the sanctity of his aircraft. He settled into his captain's chair, going through his pre-flight checklist with a renewed sense of vigor. The flight attendants were quiet, the cabin subdued. Good. A little respect for the chain of command was healthy. Chloe in particular was avoiding his gaze, her face pale and tight. He'd have to have a word with her about insubordination when they landed in New York. Ready for pushback, his co-pilot, a younger man named Mark, asked. Ready as I'll ever be. Thorne grunted. Let's get this bird in the air. Mark radioed the tower. Ella Tower. This is Stratos 712 at Gate 88. Ready for pushback and taxi. The response from the tower was not what they expected. Stratos. Hold your position. Stand by. Thorne frowned. Hold position. Why the runway is clear. He keyed the mic himself. Tower. This is Captain Thorne on 712. What's the hold-up? We're on a tight schedule. Stand by. Captain. The voice repeated this time with a formal, inflexible edge. Minutes ticked by. 5, then 10. The passengers were getting restless. Thorne was getting furious. This was an insult to his efficiency. He was about to raise hell with the tower supervisor when a different voice crackled over the radio, this time from the Stratos Air Operations Center. All Stratos Air Flight crews. All Stratos Air Flight crews. This is a fleet-wide directive from Corporate Command. Effective immediately, all flights are grounded. All aircraft currently in the air are to divert to the nearest designated Stratos Air hub. I repeat, all flights are grounded. Acknowledge. Thorne and his co-pilot stared at each other in disbelief. Ground the whole fleet. Mark whispered, his eyes wide. What the hell is going on? A terrorist threat. Nonsense, Thorne scoffed, though a knot of unease was tightening in his stomach. He grabbed the radio. Stratos Ops, this is Captain Thorne on 712. On whose authority is this order being given? I'm speaking to CEO Gregory Finch as soon as we're back at the gate. There was a pause, and then the voice from Ops came back, sounding strained. The order comes from the new owner of Stratos Air, Captain. Thorne felt a jolt, as if the plane had been struck by lightning. New owner Finch hadn't said a word. This was impossible. As if on cue, his co-pilot's phone buzzed, and then another passenger's phone buzzed, and another. A wave of notifications swept through the cabin. Mark's face went white as he read the screen of his phone. Oh my God, he breathed, looking at Thorne with an expression of pure horror. He held out his phone. The headline on the Bloomberg News alert was stark and brutal. Vance Capital Group acquires Stratos Air in surprise deal. Billionaire Elias Vance takes immediate control. Thorne stared at the name. Vance. It was an unusual name. It sounded familiar. He snatched the phone from his co-pilot's hand and looked at the photo accompanying the article. It was a picture of a man in a sharp suit accepting an award. A man with a calm, focused gaze and a discreet, expensive watch. A man who an hour ago had been wearing a simple Henley shirt and reading a paperback novel in seat 12A. The blood drained from Thorne's face. The air in the cockpit suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. He looked out the window at the terminal as if he could somehow see the man he had ejected, the man he had humiliated. The man he had told did not fit the profile. In the main cabin, Chloe was looking at the same news alert on her own phone. Her hand flew to her mouth. She connected the dots in a sickening, terrifying rush. The quiet passenger, the captain's irrational hostility, the grounding of the entire fleet. She looked towards the cockpit, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a dawning, terrible sense of justice. Captain Richard Thorne slowly placed his hands on the controls in front of him. They were cold, inert. He was the pilot in command of an aircraft that was going nowhere. He had spent his entire career climbing to the top only to discover he had just thrown himself off the summit. The summons came less than an hour after Flight 712 was ignominiously towed back to the gate. It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered by a grim-faced Stratus Air executive who met Thorne on the jet bridge. Captain Thorne, you're to report to the corporate headquarters in Century City. Immediately. A car is waiting. Thorne, still reeling, tried to bluster his way through. I need to file a flight report. I need to debrief my crew. Your crew is being debriefed by others, the executive said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You have one meeting to attend. Do not be late. During the silent, tense ride to Century City, Thorne's mind raced, cycling through denial, anger, and a creeping, nauseating fear. A new owner, Elias Vance. It had to be a coincidence, a case of mistaken identity. The man he'd removed was an imposter, surely. A charlatan trying to use the name. Yes, that had to be it. He would get to the office, find Gregory Finch, and they would sort this out. Gregory was a reasonable man. He understood the pressures of command, the need for pilots to make tough calls. He would vouch for him. He clung to this sliver of hope as he strode into the gleaming lobby of Stratus Air Tower. He didn't wait to be announced, simply took the executive elevator straight to the 54th floor, the floor that housed the main boardroom and the CEO's office. He felt his confidence returning with every foot he ascended. This was his territory. He had been celebrated in these halls. He pushed open the heavy oak doors to the boardroom and stopped dead. The room was the same one where the deal had been signed just hours earlier, but the atmosphere had curdled from melancholic transition to that of a tribunal. Several Stratus Air VPs were seated along the sides of the long mahogany table, their faces pale, their eyes fixed forward, avoiding his gaze. At the far end, looking small and defeated, sat Gregory Finch. But it was the two people at the head of the table that made Thorne's blood run cold. There was Anika Sharma, her posture radiating a lethal competence, and next to her in the chairman's seat sat Elias Vance. He was no longer the unassuming Mr. Carter. He was dressed in a razor-sharp dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant tie. The transformation was absolute. He wasn't just wearing different clothes. He was wearing power. The quiet observer from the terminal was gone, replaced by a man who radiated an almost gravitational authority. He didn't look at Thorne as he entered. He was studying a tablet in front of him, his focus absolute. Captain Thorne, thank you for joining us. Anika Sharma said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Please have a seat." She indicated a single, isolated chair placed in the middle of the room, facing the head of the table. It was less a seat and more a defendant's dock. Thorne's mouth was dry. He swallowed, his bravado evaporating under the cold, silent judgment of the room. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," he stammered, looking past Anika to Gregory Finch, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "Gregory." Finch wouldn't meet his gaze. He just stared at the polished surface of the table, a man already consigned to history. "There is no misunderstanding, Captain," Anika said. "What there is a sequence of events. At approximately 5:45 p.m. Pacific Time, you, acting as pilot in command of Stratus Air Flight 712, confronted a passenger, Mr. Elias Vance." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. Thorne flinched, as if struck. "You challenged his verified credentials," Anika continued, her tone relentless and factual. "You accused him of not fitting the profile of your clientele. You publicly humiliated him in front of a cabin of paying customers and your own flight crew. You then unlawfully ordered him to disembark the aircraft, citing fabricated security concerns. Are any of these facts in dispute?" My gut," Thorne began, his voice weak. "I have a 30-year safety record. My instincts are—" "Your instincts," Anika interrupted, her voice like chipping ice, "are a catastrophic liability to this company. Your gut just exposed Stratus Air to lawsuits that could potentially run into the tens of millions for discriminatory practices. Your instincts have violated multiple FAA regulations concerning passenger rights, and your instincts have caused immeasurable damage to this brand damage we will now spend years and a fortune to repair." She slid a folder across the table. "This is a preliminary report from our legal team. It includes statements from your co-pilot Mark Jensen and from flight attendant Chloe Davies. Both corroborate Mr. Vance's account entirely. Ms. Davies, in fact, states that she attempted to intervene on 2 occasions, only to be threatened and dismissed by you for insubordination." Thorne felt the last of the floor fall away from beneath him. Chloe, the quiet, mousy flight attendant. He had dismissed her as irrelevant. He now realized she was the star witness for his execution. Finally, Elias Vance looked up from his tablet. He placed it carefully on the table and folded his hands. He looked directly at Thorne, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the vast room, silencing every other thought. "I have a habit, Captain." Elias began, his tone conversational, almost academic. "When I acquire a new company, I like to experience it from the bottom up. I fly commercial on airlines I'm thinking of buying. I eat in the cafeterias of manufacturing plants. I use the products of software companies. I do it anonymously, because the truth of a company isn't found in a PowerPoint presentation. It's found in the unscripted moments. It's in how a janitor is treated by a manager, how a customer service call is handled, how a passenger who looks out of place is welcomed or rejected." He leaned forward slightly. "You see, Captain Thorne, today wasn't about me getting to New York. It was about you. It was a test, not of me, but of the culture Gregory built here. It was a test of the values this company claims to hold. In the space of 10 minutes, you gave me a more accurate, more insightful, and more damning cultural audit than a team of consultants could have produced in 6 months." A terrible, dawning horror was visible on Thorne's face. He wasn't being punished for a mistake. He was being thanked for revealing a fatal flaw. "You showed me that at the highest level of this organization's public-facing personnel," Elias continued, his voice still unnervingly calm, There is an arrogance, a prejudice, and a sense of entitlement that is fundamentally incompatible with the future of this brand. You believe your position gives you the right to be a gatekeeper, to decide who does and does not belong. But your only job was to fly the plane safely. You weren't just removing a passenger captain. You were showing me the rot at the heart of my new company. And for that, I do in a way thank you. You've saved me a great deal of time. Thorne finally broke. The arrogant pilot was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading man. Mr. Vance, please, it was a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. I'm sorry. I apologize. 30 years, my career. Don't do this. Elias Vance's expression did not change. It was neither cruel nor compassionate. It was simply final. This isn't about a lapse in judgment, he said. A lapse in judgment is choosing the wrong approach vector in a crosswind. This was a lapse in character, and character is not something I can fix with a training seminar. He looked at Anika. Anika opened the folder. Richard Thorne, pursuant to Section 4B of your employment contract, your employment with Stratos Air is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and actions detrimental to the company's tort interests. We will be submitting a full report of the incident to the FAA, recommending a review of your license. Security will now escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be couriered to you. Thorne stared speechless, his face ashen. He looked around the room at the men he had once commanded respect from. None would meet his eye. He was no longer one of them. He was a ghost. As two security guards entered the room and stood beside his chair, he looked at Elias Vance one last time. He saw no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. It was the dispassionate gaze of a man discarding a faulty component. That more than anything was the final crushing blow. He hadn't been defeated by an enemy. He had been rendered obsolete. The fallout was swift and brutal, executed with the precision of a surgical strike. The story didn't leak out in salacious whispers. It was deployed as a strategic weapon by Vance Capital Group itself, before Thorne had even been chauffeured home in a taxi stripped of his corporate car and his dignity. The first press release hit the wires. It was a masterclass in corporate crisis management. It didn't name Elias Vance as the passenger. It simply stated that a deeply regrettable incident of passenger discrimination had occurred on a flight prompted by the unacceptable actions of a senior pilot. The release went on to announce the pilot's immediate termination and, most importantly, detailed the sweeping changes the new ownership was implementing. This included grounding the fleet for a 48-hour values-based operational review, the hiring of a top-tier diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy led by the renowned Dr. Aaron Thorne, no relation a fact that added a particular sting of irony, and a personal public apology from the new owner, Elias Vance. By owning the narrative, Vance turned a potential PR disaster into a demonstration of his leadership. The story wasn't billionaire humiliated by racist pilot. It was new airline owner swiftly fires pilot, overhauls company, culture after witnessing discrimination firsthand. Vance became the hero of the story, not the victim. For Richard Thorne, however, the nightmare was just beginning. He had imagined himself a martyr, a man of principle standing against the decline of standards. He quickly found he was a pariah. His phone, once filled with contacts from across the aviation industry, fell silent. The few calls he made were met with curt, dismissive responses. His actions were not seen as a principled stand. They were seen as a toxic combination of bigotry and stupidity. He had threatened the one thing the industry cared about more than anything, the bottom line. No one wanted to be associated with that. He called the pilots' union, expecting a robust defense. The union representative was cold. "Rich, you didn't deny a passenger based on a safety concern like an obvious intoxication or a threat. You denied him based on your gut. You did it in front of 30 witnesses, including your own crew, who are on record disagreeing with you. And the guy you kicked off now owns the company and holds all the cards. What exactly do you want us to defend?" His name, which Vance's official releases had carefully omitted, was leaked within days. Aviation blogs and industry forums lit up. Pilots who had flown with him for years, who had chafed under his arrogance, now shared stories of his condescending attitude, his off-color jokes, his general demeanor of superiority. He wasn't just fired, he was disgraced. The FAA review of his license became a formal investigation, and with the full weight of Vance Aero's, the rebranded Stratus Air legal team, providing evidence, its suspension was all but guaranteed. The financial collapse came next. Thorne had lived a life commensurate with a top-tier pilot's salary. He had a sprawling house in a gated Calabasas community, a mortgage to match a new Mercedes G-Wagon for his wife, and a membership at a prestigious golf club. It was a lifestyle built on the assumption of a perpetual high income. Without that income, the house of cards tumbled. After 3 months of no work and mounting legal fees, the first "for sale" sign went up on his perfectly manicured lawn. The G-Wagon was repossessed. His wife, a woman who had married a respected airline captain, not an unemployed pariah, packed her bags. The argument was brief and brutal. "You did this to us, Richard," she'd said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Your ego, your prejudice. You threw it all away because you didn't like the look of someone. I can't live with that kind of fool." He was forced to sell the house at a loss in a down market. He moved into a small, soulless apartment in the valley. The roar of commercial jets from the nearby Van Nuys airport. A constant mocking reminder of the world he had lost. He applied for jobs, regional carriers, cargo planes, flight instruction schools. The answer was always the same. No one would touch him. The name Richard Thorne was now synonymous with liability. One sweltering afternoon, a year after the incident, he was working a part-time job. He'd finally managed to land driving a shuttle van for a budget airport parking lot. It was humiliating work hauling luggage for vacationing families who barely gave him a second glance. As he waited for a family to unload their minivan, he saw it. Soaring gracefully into the sky was a sleek jet and Embraer just like the one he used to fly. But the livery was different. The old, stuffy Stratus Air logo was gone, replaced by a dynamic, elegant VA for Vance Aero. The tail was painted in a sweeping gradient of blues and purples, a design that spoke of modernity and inclusivity. He watched it climb a silver shape against the vast, indifferent blue sky, until it was just a speck. That plane represented everything he had lost. It was more than a job or a salary. It was his identity, his status, his entire world. And he had burned it all to the ground with a single ugly spark of prejudice. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had revealed who he truly was, and the world in turn had shown him his new place in it. The shuttle van's dispatch radio crackled, calling him to another pickup. He put the van in gear, the weight of his karma heavier than any luggage he would ever have to lift. While Richard Thorne's life spiraled downward, the company he was exiled from began a dramatic, arduous, and ultimately meteoric ascent. The 48-hour fleet grounding was more than a logistical nightmare and a PR masterstroke. It was the crucible in which the new Vance Aero was forged. For 2 frantic days, employees across the company, from pilots and flight attendants to mechanics and schedulers, were thrown into a state of managed chaos. Fear of layoffs warred with a budding sense of excitement. Something profound was happening. Elias Vance did not remain sequestered in the 54th floor boardroom. The day after Thorne's termination, he was in a cavernous hangar at LAX, surrounded by grease-stained mechanics and weary ground crew. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple polo shirt and jeans, an approachable figure against the backdrop of a massive jet engine. He hadn't called a formal meeting. He simply showed up with coffee and donuts and started listening. "Tell me what's broken," he said, his voice cutting through the awkward silence. "Not the planes. The company. What frustrates you? What's inefficient? What do you wish management understood?" At first, the answers were hesitant, but an older mechanic, a man named Sal, who had been with the company for 25 years, finally spoke up. "We file reports about equipment needing replacement, and they get lost in paperwork for 6 months because someone in accounting doesn't want to approve the expense until the next quarter. We're patching things that should be replaced. It's safe, but it's not efficient. It costs us man-hours and flight delays." Elias nodded typing notes into his phone. "No more," he said simply. "Maintenance and engineering get autonomous budget approval for all essential-to-service parts. Anika will have the new policy written by noon." What else? The floodgates opened. Baggage handlers spoke of outdated scanning equipment. Schedulers complained about a rigid seniority-based system that burned out junior pilots while leaving senior ones underutilized. A picture emerged of a company that under Gregory Finch had been coasting on its reputation, riddled with complacency and petty fiefdoms. This process was repeated across the company. Elias and Anika became whirlwinds of change, absorbing data, identifying problems, and implementing immediate solutions. They dismantled the old, intimidating corporate structure. The 54th floor, once the exclusive domain of executives, was redesigned. The massive mahogany table was removed and donated to a charity auction. In its place, a large circular table made of light-colored sustainable bamboo was installed. The walls were covered in whiteboards that were soon filled with diagrams, flowcharts, and ideas from every level of the company. At the heart of the cultural rebuild was Chloe Davies. Her promotion to Vice President of In-Flight Experience and Culture was met with some predictable grumbling from the old guard. One senior VP of Operations, a holdover from Finch's era, confronted her in a meeting. "With all due respect, Chloe," he'd said condescendingly, "you were serving coffee last week. What do you know about managing a department?" Chloe, backed by the unshakable support of Elias, met his gaze without flinching. "I know what it feels like to be threatened by a captain for doing my job. I know what our passengers see. I know that the Stratos Air standard was to make the client feel rich, while the Vance standard will be to make the passenger feel seen, respected, and safe. My job isn't about managing budgets. It's about making sure what happened on Flight 712 is not just a fireable offense, but a cultural impossibility." She won the argument, and soon after the VP took early retirement. Working directly with Dr. Aaron Thorne's highly respected DEI consultancy, Chloe helped craft the Vance standard. It was an intensive, week-long training program that was mandatory for every single employee. They used state-of-the-art flight simulators, not just to practice emergency landings, but to run complex interactive role-playing scenarios. Pilots were put in situations where they had to de-escalate conflicts with passengers who were anxious or who had special needs or who simply didn't fit the profile. The goal was not to teach a script, but to build empathy as a core competency. One of Richard Thorne's old golfing buddies, a captain named Bill, went in, scoffing. He emerged visibly shaken. "I always thought Rich was just particular," he admitted to his co-pilot. "But after that simulation, realizing how my own assumptions look from the other side, I get it now. I was just lucky I never had my Elias Vance moment." The visual identity of the company was reborn. The stuffy Stratus Air charter was officially rebranded as Vance Aero. The new logo, a sleek VA, was paired with a tail design featuring a sweeping gradient of blues and purples meant to evoke both the dawn and the dusk sky, a symbol of a 24/7 commitment to service. The uniforms were redesigned by an up-and-coming fashion designer, focusing on modern, stylish cuts that allowed for comfort and movement for all body types. A year and a half after the acquisition, the transformation was complete. Vance Aero was not just a turnaround story. It was the new industry leader in customer satisfaction and employee morale. Elias Vance, for the first time since the incident, booked a flight for himself. New York to San Francisco. He didn't use a pseudonym. He walked through the modern, brightly lit Vance Aero terminal at JFK and felt a deep sense of pride. The atmosphere was different. It was calm, but also energized. He saw a diverse team of ground staff working together with smooth efficiency. He walked onto the plane and was greeted at the door by the flight's captain, a sharp, professional African-American woman in her late 30s named Captain Eva Rostova. She smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance. It's an honor to have you." "The honor is all mine, Captain," Elias replied, shaking her hand. "Thank you for your service." He took his seat, 12A, the same seat from that fateful day. He looked around, the full cabin. It was a mosaic of modern America business travelers of all ethnicities, a young family with a baby, a group of college students, a musician with a cello case. This was the vision. This was what he had built. As the plane accelerated down the runway, its powerful engines pressing him back into the supple leather, Elias felt the familiar thrill of ascent. He looked out the window as the ground fell away, the sprawling city lights becoming a glittering, interconnected web. He thought about Richard Thorne, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. Thorne, like Gregory Finch, had seen the world in terms of fixed hierarchies and profiles. They saw what was. Elias's entire life, his entire success was built on seeing what could be. He saw the untapped potential in a struggling company, the courage in a young flight attendant, the possibility of a better, more decent way to do business. He hadn't just bought an airline. He had bought an opportunity to prove that a company's character is its most valuable asset. And as the plane leveled off, cruising high above the clouds, the sky outside was clear open and limitless. The story of Richard Thorne and Elias Vance is a stark reminder that the biggest risks in life often come not from the market, but from the mirror. Thorne's prejudice, his belief in his own superiority, made him blind to the reality right in front of him, and the fall was as swift as it was absolute. Elias Vance, on the other hand, built his empire on the principle of seeing value where others see nothing, and character where others see only profiles. He didn't just buy an airline. He infused it with a vision where everyone has a place and everyone is treated with respect. This story shows that true power isn't about keeping people out. It's about having the vision and strength to welcome them in. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama justice and the powerful, unyielding force of karma. Thank you for watching.